Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are crouched on the crumbling edge of a salt-bitten cliff, staring at a goat that shouldn't be here. Its horns shimmer not with sweat or sun, but with coral. Real coral, the kind that should be hundreds of meters below us, clinging to reef skeletons and the slow hush of tide. The goat just stands there like it knows something you don't. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive trying to find out what that something is. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Drop your location and what time it is in the comments. I want to know who else is awake for this strange descent. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle along this cliff's edge, hands out for balance, mouth dry from the salty wind. The goat, white with copper dapples, doesn't flinch. You've been watching it for 10 minutes, and it hasn't even blinked. Both horns sweep back like spirals of driftwood carved by flame, but it's the crusting of coral red knotted delicate as old lace that makes your stomach sink. It looks too precise to be random, too embedded to be ornamental, like it grew there. A breeze stings your eyes and you blink hard. When you open them, the goat is gone. Not vanished, just gone, like it never stood there at all. Only hoof prints in gravel and one shard of coral the color of dried blood. You pick it up. It's warm. Not like rock warmed by sun, but warm like breath. You press it to your cheek, and for a split second you swear you hear a low, hollow hum. It's probably just wind in your ear canal. Probably. Historians still debate whether this coastal region ever hosted coral-forming waters. Some claim the reefs were artificial, placed there deliberately by pre-agricultural tribes. Others think the coral was traded in, brought by seafarers, or scavenged from shipwrecks. But no one explains why the goats wore it, or why they seem to prefer it. Down the slope, you see a gathering of goats further inland, their horns smooth, unadorned. They snort as you approach, but none run. You expect one of them to match the creature from the cliff, but no, none wear coral. None except one lone kid hiding behind a boulder nibbling seaweed. You spot a single loop of soft pink coral tied loosely around its neck with sinew. The kid looks at you, then back at the ocean. You swear its ears twitch to the rhythm of the waves. It makes a sound that is not quite a bleat, almost like a hum. The same one you heard earlier, except now it's not in your head. A nearby herder trudges up. He's older than stone face, baked into crevices by wind and suspicion. It's not decoration, he says before you can ask. It's a warning. You raise an eyebrow. Of what? He squints at the horizon like he's reading it. Of things beneath. Turns out goats weren't always land dwellers. Fossils from the coastal ranges show a lineage of nimble, cloven-hoofed animals that spent significant time on rocky islets. Some even show signs of webbing between toes. A few skulls found near tide pools bear strange ridges. Some believe they were coral scars, remnants of parasitic growth. Others insist they were signs of symbiosis. But again, none of that explains the choice. Why wear coral at all? Why only some goats and only sometimes? The old man takes out a cracked bone pipe and points it at the kid. Her name's Skybite. Found her after a red tide washed the beach. She already had that around her neck. He leans in. His breath smells like kelp and thyme. She hums in her sleep. You sit with that a while. That night you camp not far from the cliff. The goats nestle on seagrass. You lie with your back to a warm rock, and at some point deep in the silence between wind gusts you hear it. A low rhythmic hum. Not from one place, but many. Like the sound is stitched into the air. You check the kid again. She's asleep. The coral band around her neck glows faintly under the moon. Goats don't hum. Not like that. Not in groups. Not unless it's not the goats making the sound. In the morning, you wake to gulls circling overhead. Skybite is gone. You track her to the cliff, but this time you don't find her standing proud and still. You find hoof prints in a widening spiral, and in the middle, no goat, just a shallow depression like something rose from beneath and whispered her name. You find a strand of coral, this one pale white, almost translucent. It smells like salt and something older, something that remembers when reefs were thrones and goats were messengers. As you sit there thumb tracing the coral's knots, you remember an odd fact in the Bronze Age sailors sometimes tied coral to livestock before ocean crossings believing it absorbed curses. And in ancient Sardinia, goat horns were adorned with reef fragments to confuse spirits that walked backwards. Weirder still, there's a theory that some goats exposed to salt water over generations developed a unique resistance to bone erosion, and coral, always seeking calcium, may have favored their skulls. No one agrees on whether that's myth or biology, but the idea sticks with you. Because deep down you know this isn't about goats wearing coral. It's about something choosing to wear goats. You follow the ridge trail eastward away from the vanished kid and the cliffs whisper. Salt crunches beneath your boots, and the air tastes like rusted coins. Ahead, a thin column of smoke rises from a camp surrounded by stone cairns and goat droppings. As you draw closer, the wind picks up sharp and sudden, like it's testing your skin for weakness. Here, the salt wind doesn't just sting, it etches. It gnaws at bone. It sands the world down to the marrow. You arrive at the herder's coastal encampment as the sun flattens into a blood coin. The tents are stitched from seal hide, barnacle crusted at the seams, and the people here don't wave hello. They just nod like trees and gesture at the goats with their chins. 100 or more scattered across the rocky dunes and shallow tidal pools, nibbling seagrass and licking salt from exposed driftwood. None of the goats wear coral, not yet, but many have shaved rings around their horns as though something was once wound tightly and recently removed. One woman, tall eyes like crushed mussel shell hands, you a bowl of broth and points to a crude pen. Newlings, she says. Watch them. You'll see. You lean on the fence and scan the young goats inside. A few sport clumsy wraps of twine and kelp. One is trying to bite another's ear. Typical kids. But then you notice beneath the largest one's chin a shard of orange coral tied with sinew. It flicks as the goat chews, catching the light with a glassy flicker. You step closer. The goat freezes. Its eyes' horizontal slits, like all goats, widen almost imperceptibly. You could swear the coral shifts just a little, like it's breathing. You back off. At dinner, you sit near the fire with your broth, which tastes like burnt sponge in despair. A herder across from you breaks the silence. They grow the coral, he mutters when the winds come from the east. You blink. You mean the goats? He shrugs. Or the wind. Or the things in the wind. Doesn't matter. Same story. The conversation fades into the snapping of driftwood in the flames. Nearby, someone begins a song, low and wordless, all throat and vibration. It carries like fog. The goats lift their heads. Some hum back. You don't sleep much. The next morning, a horn is blown, a sharp, vibrating note that sounds more like an underwater scream than anything you'd expect from a land animal. The goats all rise and begin walking, no herding, no calls. Just movement. You follow. The coastal trail turns narrow and jagged, littered with salt fossil shells and the remains of crabs picked clean. You walk for hours as the wind shifts, subtly bringing with it the unmistakable smell of coral reef at low tide. Eventually, the terrain flattens and opens into a coastal plain where wind hits hard enough to shake thought loose. Here, the goats form spirals, no herding, no command. Just spirals. Each time the wind shifts direction, the spiral tightens or relaxes. You lean toward a nearby herder. Is this training? He smiles like someone who's buried too many truths. This is listening. The spirals are mesmerizing. You lose track of time. One goat collapses exhausted. Another steps over it like it's part of the trail. A younger goat bleats and is immediately nudged back into place. Then, just as quickly as it began, the spiral disperses. The goats scatter. One trots over to a tide pool and dips its horn in. Coral, impossibly fast, begins to bloom from the contact point, slow at first, then more urgent like frost on glass. You stagger backward. It's not normal, not natural. The goat doesn't react. An older man, the same herder who spoke of the things in the wind, approaches and holds out a palm. It's full of broken coral shards. Used to be, they only grew in water, he says. Now they grow on breath. That night you help wind twine around a pair of horns. The goat squirms. You murmur a lullaby someone taught you. It doesn't calm the animal, but it calms you. There's a legend. One woman whispers to you after the stars have come out like brittle shell fragments in the sky, that long ago a great wind rose from the sea, not a storm, but a being. It moved through herds and herders alike, tasting each. It left behind coral, not as a weapon, not as a gift, but as a message. I see you, the wind said. Now you see me. And to this day, when the wind returns, the goats wear coral, so the being will know they remember. Historians still debate whether this spiral behavior was practical, perhaps a way to track wind shifts for safety, or symbolic, a visual prayer. Some believe it was a memory trigger designed to reawaken ancient instincts buried in goat DNA. Others think the whole thing is blown out of proportion by modern mystics looking for poetry where there was only pasture. But none of that explains what you see the next morning. A new goat has joined the herd. Pale gray, darker hooves. Its horns are not grown, but coral spirals already bloom from its head like a delicate crown. No one tied it. No one placed it. The coral grew. You lean closer and the goat hums at you. Not a bleat, not a sigh. A hum. Not deep, more like the tone of a seashell held to the ear. And as you listen, you realize it's not a note. It's a name. Your name. You wake in the dark long before the sun has even considered peeking over the horizon. The fire has died. The goats are still. And the wind, for the first time since you arrived, has stopped completely. The world feels like it's holding its breath. You sit up slowly, sand stuck to your lips and the taste of brine clinging to your throat like regret. Across the camp, a shape moves, small, barefoot. You squint through the pre-dawn haze and spot a child no taller than a goat's flank, carrying something that glints softly in the moonlight. They kneel beside a young nanny goat and begin braiding. It's not hair they're weaving, it's coral. You crawl closer, silent. The child doesn't look up. Their hands move with slow precision, looping soft pink coral strands through the goat's horn spirals. Not just tying them, but braiding them like someone making a crown that had been woven before thousands of times by hands now dust. The goat shudders once, then goes still. Its eyes close. Not in fear, but something else. Something that looks like surrender, or maybe trust. You whisper, "What are you doing?" The child doesn't answer. They finish the braid, press their forehead gently to the goats, and then whisper something so quietly the wind has to lean in to hear it. When they finally stand, the goat's horns are glistening with pink coral lace, and the child's fingertips are bleeding slightly. Not from the coral, but from tiny cuts already scabbing like the coral took something in return. "Why do you do that?" you ask again. The child finally turns to you. Their voice is high and steady like a reed flute playing in a cave. So the sky listens better. There's no follow-up, no smile. They walk back to a stone tent and vanish like breath into fog. You touch the goat's horn. It's warm. You almost expect it to hum. Later, you ask one of the herders about the child. They shrug. "Been here longer than memory. Doesn't talk to many. Just the goats. And storms." You stare at them. Storms. They nod, dead serious. Every time one's coming, they make a braid. Pink coral, never red. Red's for death. You look around. You look around. Half a dozen goats now wear pink coral bands, all done in the same careful twist. The air is still, but it smells electric. Like something huge and heavy is waiting just offshore. The next day, a traveler arrives. Skin like burned driftwood, eyes like glass floats she carries. No pack, just a walking stick carved with goat spirals. She glances once at the braided goats and frowns. "Too many with pink," she mutters. "Means the sky's going deaf again." You spend the afternoon helping the herders tie down tents and stack stones along the pen walls. A storm is coming. You can feel it. But this time, it doesn't feel like weather, it feels personal. like the ocean got stood up and is now marching inland to collect its apology. That night the child braids one last goat. But this one old horn cracked ribs like prayer hands is given a different braid. One part pink, one part black coral. The herders say nothing. They just stand in a circle as the child finishes and backs away trembling. No one hums that night. The storm hits like a sentence. Wind screams. Water roars up from the cliffs and spins through camp like it's looking for someone. You shelter under a stone ledge with 3 goats pressed against you. One of them braided pink starts humming, not bleeding, humming. A soft, vibrating tone that matches the wind's rhythm for a heartbeat. Then it shifts. The wind hesitates. It's not stopping, but it's listening. The goat hums louder. One of the herders' face streaked with sea foam, and panic shouts, "It's working!" But then comes the flash. The old goat, the one with the black coral braid, is standing on the ridge horns raised like antennae. The lightning hits him directly. You scream. The goats scatter. Everything goes white. When you wake, it's dawn again. The sky is soft. The wind is gone. Everything smells like scorched salt. You crawl up the ridge knees, trembling to find the old goat's body. Only there's no body. Just a spiral of black coral fused into the earth, still warm. And nearby, the child sits quietly wrapping their own wrist with a pink strand. You approach, gently. Was that goat a sacrifice? The child looks at you, sad but calm. No, they whisper. He volunteered. Historians still debate whether this coral braiding ritual had anything to do with meteorology. Some claim it was a form of early storm prediction, goats reacting to changes in barometric pressure and children picking up on their behavior. Others argue the whole tradition was symbolic, a way of giving fear a shape. But there are records scratched into whalebone and driftwood of storms that paused, turned, or vanished completely when goats began humming. And no one has ever explained why some coral strands pulled from horn spirals glow faintly under lightning. An odd side note: in one Mesopotamian fragment, goats are referred to as hearing stones of the wind. Some scholars dismiss this as metaphor. Others point to acoustic resonance in horn shapes. But just a few suggest that the braiding was never for the goats. It was for the sky. The next morning, the child is gone. The storm has left coral debris scattered across the cliff's edge. You find a new goat, this one small and quiet, with a braid already formed. You pick it up. It hums. It's your voice this time. You leave the camp with your thoughts swirling louder than the wind ever did. Behind you, the goats return to grazing like nothing strange happened, like no one braided coral into their horns, like the sky hadn't almost torn itself open to listen. But you can't shake it, the way the old goat stood with lightning in his eyes, how the child vanished without leaving tracks, how the braid hummed your name. You decide to follow the coastline. Not inland, no. Out toward the crooked cliffs where, according to half-whispered talk around the fire, something came up once and a goat didn't come down. That something, you learn, was a storm. A real one. The kind sailors write poems about in cracked ink. The kind herders bury memories of under rock piles. It happened 3 decades ago. A rogue surge hit the cliffs during what was supposed to be a clear blue day. Goats were grazing, children were playing. And then snap, the sea climbed the land like it had arms. They say one goat, a black-haired matriarch with spiraled horns and a coral ring through her left one, got caught in the flood. Carried out to sea. Lost. 3 days later, she came back. Not walking, not floating. Just standing there one morning on the edge of the same cliff she vanished from. Alive. Horns heavier, with coral fused directly into the bone. You hike to that place. Locals call it the Widow's Crook. The cliffs there look like the ribs of an ancient fish. The grass never grows quite right. The air smells different, like rusted wind chimes. And something else. Something layered. Wet stone and damp fur. Memory, maybe. The rocks are slippery, but you find the place where she was seen. A shallow impression in the stone, curved, like something had curled there watching the sea. And beside it still, there is a set of hoofprints in hardened sediment. Deep. Too deep for a regular goat. Like whatever made them had grown heavier, or older, or more. You kneel and touch the prints. That's when you hear the hum again. Only this time it's not nearby, it's beneath. The ground beneath you vibrates like a throat mid-song. The hum rises in pitch, subtle but insistent, and then fades into silence so sudden it feels like falling. You stagger back, and then you see it. Just beyond the rocks, half buried in a sand-slick crevice, a goat skull. You pull it free. It's light, almost hollowed, but its horns, massive, weather-worn, sea-bleached, are laced with coral. Not tied, grown. Wrapped in and around the spirals like ivy made of glass. Barnacles too nestled in the crevices, and strange, delicate shell fragments fused so neatly into the bone it looks ornamental. You turn the skull over and carved on the inside of the jaw is a spiral. Not scratched, ingrained as if grown from the bone itself. Some scholars argue that these fusions are rare examples of post-mortem coral colonization, where bone submerged in the right tidal conditions becomes a reef scaffold. But this skull was never submerged. Not according to the stories. Not unless the sea brought it back after changing it. The coral here is old. You can feel it in your fingers. And yet it's not brittle. It pulses slightly when you press it to your palm, like it remembers the hum. Back at the ridge, you lay the skull gently in the grass and sit beside it until the sun dips. You think you hear hoofbeats once, but when you turn, there's nothing. Then at the edge of the cliff, a single goat appears. Smaller than most. Light-boned. Its horns are smooth, untouched by coral. But its eyes lock onto yours, and for a second you know it knows what you're holding. It steps forward, slowly. You hold out the skull. Was this yours, you ask, half laughing at yourself? The goat doesn't answer, of course. Instead, it places its nose gently against the coral crown and hums. The tone is soft, lower than the others you've heard. Not a name, not a warning. Just a note, a recognition. And then the goat turns and walks away back toward the wild cliffs like it came from a forgotten memory. That night, you dream of walking underwater. Not drowning, not swimming, just walking. The ocean around you is still and pale, lit from nowhere. Goats graze on seaweed hanging like curtains from coral arches. Some of them wear horn crowns, humming as they go. Others kneel beside sleeping coral beds, whispering to the shells. You pass by one goat lying still, its body wrapped in kelp, eyes shut. It's the old matriarch. She opens one eye. "You're late," she says. You jolt awake, breathless. The cliff is silent, but the skull is gone. Historians still debate whether the so-called returning goat was a folktale or a misidentified survivor. One theory suggests that the original goat was swept away and replaced by a similar-looking wild one. But others, especially among the coastal clans, believe she was given back by something deeper than water. An odd fact, coral can regenerate when broken, and some forms even thrive in complete darkness. One researcher once called it the living memory of the ocean. That phrase haunts you now, because when you reach into your pack the next morning, you find a piece of coral you didn't place there. Soft, pink, warm, and carved not naturally but carefully with a spiral. You return to the salt camps by noon, heart thudding with questions that don't have roots in language anymore. The shard of spiral-carved coral stays warm in your palm the entire journey. Not hot, not glowing, just body warm, like it never left someone. The herders have begun a ritual. You arrive just in time to see them lowering a coral-crowned goat skull into a tide pool, the horns catching sun like wet brass. The pool itself isn't deep, only knee-height, but the way the herders treat it, you'd think it was a cathedral. Everyone is silent. Even the goats are unusually still. The skull disappears beneath the surface with a faint chime. Not a splash, not a plop. A chime. Like someone tapped a glass bell underwater. You look to the tide pool and realize something odd. There are no fish, no crabs, no movement at all, except the slow pulsing of coral clusters around the basin edge. They look like lungs or ears. One herder notices your stare and leans over. "They listen," she says. You glance at her. The coral. "No," she says. "The one's in it." You don't follow. Or maybe you do, but you're afraid to admit it. The ritual continues. One by one, herders step forward, touch the water, then whisper into it. Not prayers, not chants, just memories. You recognize the cadence of storytelling. Someone talks about a goat that once climbed too high and had to be rescued. Another shares a moment of laughter during a mudslide. A third mutters a name over and over like it's all they have left of someone. When it's your turn, the silence is heavier. The others look away politely as if shielding you from their expectations. You kneel by the pool, still clutching your warm shard. You whisper, "I think you remember me." The coral shifts slightly, just a ripple, but enough. You drop the shard into the tide pool. It doesn't sink. It floats, spins once, then gently settles at the center. No one gasps, no one cries, but they all know. Later, an elder, her eyes milky but alert, sits beside you, sewing a new strap of sinew around another goat's horn. She talks slowly, not asking for eye contact. Tease. "We place the coral in the water so it can speak," she says. "Or listen, depends on the tide." You nod. Sometimes she adds it answers. You look up. How? She doesn't reply. Instead, she takes a thin sliver of coral from a pouch and places it in your palm. "It won't glow for you," she says. "Not yet, but keep it. It'll remember when to glow." You don't argue. That evening, just before sunset, you follow the child again. Somehow they've returned. They walk barefoot to the same pool. You stay back hidden among rocks. This time, instead of braiding, they carry a bundle of coral shards tied with goat hair. They scatter the shards gently into the water. Then they hum. Not to the goats, not to the sky, to the water. And then the water hums back, low, measured, rhythmic. Not a voice exactly, but a pattern, a response. The child doesn't flinch, they just nod. You nearly fall backward in the sand. When you return to camp, someone's painting a spiral on a tent wall using ochre mixed with crushed coral. They offer you a turn. You dip your finger into the chalky mix and add a tiny swirl at the spiral's edge. It feels like closing a loop or opening one. Historians still debate whether the tide pool rituals were religious, mnemonic, or purely aesthetic. Some believe they were the earliest forms of memory mapping, each coral shard a mnemonic anchor for oral traditions. Others insist these were burial rites for goats, assigning them human-like reverence. One theory even suggests the pools were acoustic devices. Their odd shape and coral density allowed them to store sound like ancient wax cylinders releasing echoes of past voices during low tide. No one has proven it, but no one's disproven it either. A curious aside, coral polyps respond to sound vibrations, especially low-frequency hums. Some marine biologists have even experimented with playing recorded whale songs to stimulate reef growth, which raises a haunting thought: what if the goats didn't just wear coral to carry memory? What if they wore it to recite it? That night you dream again. You stand ankle-deep in a glowing tide pool, coral blooming around your legs like candles. In the water, your reflection has horns, and woven through them, pink, red, black, and pale, is a braid you recognize. You reach up to touch it. From behind you, a voice says, "Now you're ready." You turn. It's the old goat, still alive, still coral-crowned. Only this time, they're the one walking you into the sea. You don't wake screaming. You wake humming. And the coral sliver in your pouch, glowing just faintly. But enough. You take the glowing sliver out into the night. It lights your fingers in faint rose and amber, like sunrise seen through blood. No one else is awake, at least you think they aren't. The goats sleep curled together like a breathing, snoring continent, but a few of them stir when you pass. And one, pale, nearly translucent in the moonlight, stands up and follows you. Its horns are still bare. You walk together in silence until the dunes give way to flat rock and the ocean's breath gets louder again. The cliffs are distant now. The wind returns gentler this time, but still carrying that strange low hum like thunder trying to whisper. There's a small island offshore. You've heard rumors. The herders call it Wrong Kin, roughly the Shard Throne. No one lives there, but stories say goats have ruled it. Not metaphorically, literally. That once, during a drought, that cracked riverbeds like baked bread. A group of wild she-goats swam to the island, built nests from sea kelp, and refused to return even when tempted with grain. They didn't need food, they said. They had wind and coral. You hire a boy with a flat-bottomed boat. He doesn't ask questions, but his eyes don't meet yours either. Just before you set off, he tosses a shard of white coral over his shoulder into the sea. You ask why. For trade, he says. So they'll let us pass. The journey takes less than 10 minutes, but every second of it feels like a dare. The water is wrong, too smooth, too deep for how shallow it should be. You try not to look over the edge. The goat beside you. Yes, it came too, stares straight ahead like it's been waiting for this crossing since before it was born. When you arrive, the island looks unremarkable. Just sand, a few crooked palms, a boulder field with some weathered grass. But the deeper you walk, the less sense anything makes. The boulders are arranged in circles, perfect ones. Some of them are draped with seaweed like veils, and nestled between the stones are goats. Not dozens, not hundreds, just 9, each one crowned. Their horns are massive, larger than any domestic goats you've ever seen, and completely encased in coral. Crimson lilac, obsidian, sun yellow. One even wears a deep blue coral spiral that buzzes faintly in your teeth when you look at it too long. They don't move. They just are, watching. The goat beside you hums once, and the crowned ones rise together. As one, you freeze. They walk slow and silent, forming a circle around you. Not aggressive, not welcoming, like judges or custodians. One steps forward. Its crown is black and jagged, tipped with what looks like tiny bell shells. It lowers its head, not threatening, just close enough for you to see the strange pattern etched into the coral. It's your spiral. The same one that burned into your palm. The same one you dreamed in the tide pool. And suddenly you understand they know you. Or at least they know something about you. Something they've waited for. You reach into your pouch, pull out the glowing shard, and offer it. The black-crowned goat nudges it once, then steps back. Then, all at once, the goats begin humming. It's not song, it's code. Layers of frequency wrapped around one another like sea rope. You can't understand it, but you feel it. Like a story injected directly into your marrow. Images fill your mind. Lightning striking water that doesn't boil. Coral rising like smoke through fur. Horns becoming instruments, goats walking backward into the sea. One fragment lingers of a goat walking into a cave lined with coral and never walking out, only echoing. You open your eyes. The goats are gone. No, they're still there, but different. Frozen. Like statues, eyes dimmed. Like their message took all they had left. You and your companion, the pale goat, are alone again, but not empty. You feel the message humming in your veins. You sail back at dawn. The boy waits on shore, pretending not to notice that your goat is now crowned. A faint strand of white coral has wrapped itself around one horn. Grown there, not tied. Historians still debate whether wrong kin ever existed. Satellite scans show no significant elevation where it should be. Some say it's a sandbar that comes and goes with the tide. Others believe the crowned goats were just metaphor symbols of matriarchal lineages or coastal clan emblems. But every few decades, someone comes back with coral-wrapped horn fragments that defy dating. They're always warm to the touch. A strange fact: in certain rare environments, coral can begin calcifying around bone in less than 12 hours, especially if seeded by an organic trace signature. But to shape itself into perfect spirals, that's not biology. That's memory sculpting itself. That evening back at camp, the herders gather in a circle. No fire, no chanting, just silence. You step forward and place your new companion in the center. She walks calmly to the tide pool and lowers her horns. The coral begins to hum. By the time the sun sets again, the goat with the pale horn and new coral wrap has become a kind of quiet center. The other goats drift near her, not too close, but always within hum's reach. She never bleats. She doesn't even graze much, but sometimes only when no one's watching directly she tilts her head just so and the coral flicker. And in those moments the wind listens. You sit by the tide pool with your legs in the water. The hum is gone for now, replaced by that eerie kind of silence only tide water can hold when the ocean retracts its breath and leaves a stillness thick as glue. You feel something in your pack and reach inside half expecting another shard. But it isn't new. It's the carved spiral from days ago, only now it's grown. The edges are thicker, curved, richer in color. A darker rose. The spiral itself seems deeper, as if it's been carved further inward by unseen hands, or grown into the way a tree accepts a nail over time. You set it beside the pool, and as the water laps close, a pulse passes through it. You lean forward. The water clears. And there it is, a fossil. Wedged in the coral just beneath the surface, a goat skull, ancient and impossible. The horns are smaller than modern goats, curled in tight, perfect spirals, but laced all the way down with what looks like coral filigree. The pattern matches the one you carry. You ask around and one herder nods slowly. You found it, she says. The first. The first what? The first coral bearer. The goat that changed the wind. No one knows when it lived, but the skull now visible in full daylight has been dated once. The story goes that a group of coastal scholars pulled it out decades ago, sent it inland for testing, and never got it back. The bones disappeared, so they told the tide pool the story, returned only a shard. And the next spring the skull reappeared in the water whole again. That's why it stays here. Not as a relic, as an agreement. You're allowed to look, never allowed to keep. Later that night, someone tells you the fossil doesn't belong in any known goat lineage. The skull curvature is all wrong, too flat, too narrow. The horns don't spiral the right way, and yet they fit. Not with biology, with memory. Historians still debate whether the fossil is real or symbolic. Some suggest it was carved from drift bone and placed there as a hoax. Others claim it predates domestication, which would make it evidence of a symbiotic species lost to time. You ask what symbiotic means in this case. Not ridden, someone says, not used, listened to. You press your palm against the water above the fossil. The spiral in your other hand grows warm again. Not burning, not pulsing, humming. The child reappears that evening, walking backward along the shoreline. You watch them closely. They carry a pouch full of braided coral and what looks like hair. Goat hair, probably, maybe. They stop beside you and look at the pool. She's remembering, the child says. You follow their gaze to the crowned goat. Her coral has grown more. It now branches in tiny antler-like shapes along her horn, soft-edged but unmistakable, like a signal sprouting from bone. She's almost ready to speak, the child says. You blink, speak, they nod. When the coral finishes listening, it speaks back. You want to laugh, but you don't. Not here, not now. Because deep down you already believe it. That night, the crowned goat walks to the pool on her own. No one follows. No one dares. She steps into the water, and the fossil glows, just faintly, just once. But everyone sees it. In the distance, the cliffs echo a sound that could have been thunder, or a word, and the goat turns slowly just once to look back at you, like she's asking a question you haven't learned to hear yet. Historians still debate whether memory can be imprinted biologically. Theories abound. Some suggest electrical fields in coral may preserve neural patterns. Others believe it's all folk myth handed down and misinterpreted until fact and ritual became indistinguishable. But every decade or so, someone finds a goat skull with coral embedded in the bone. Not draped, not tangled, grown into it. And every single time, the horn spiral faces the sea. One odd note from a 1930s researcher dismissed at the time mentions coral samples taken from a goat's horn that emitted a faint vibration at specific frequencies, like a seashell that remembers a different ocean, he wrote. You pocket your spiral that night and sleep without dreaming. When you wake, the crowned goat is beside you. She hums once gently. and walks away toward the cliffs. You follow her, not because you've decided to exactly, but because there's no reality in which you could not. The crowned goat walks with that impossible calm, as if every hoof step has already happened. The coral along her horn catches the rising sun and refracts it in lines across the stone like ripples without water. She leads you beyond the usual grazing fields past the spiral stones and out toward a section of coast the herders warned you never to enter. Too thin, one of them said. The air, the rules. It frays out there. You're beginning to understand what they meant. The land changes as you walk. Grass gives way to salt-dusted shale, then to dry coral crusts that crunch underfoot. The sky is too quiet. Even the birds have fallen silent. A sharp tang fills your nose like blood, but colder. Eventually, you reach a lagoon unlike anything you've seen. No water, just a basin of white sand surrounded by wind-carved coral towers that lean slightly inward as if eavesdropping. And at the center, a platform of bone. Not built, grown. You hesitate, but the goat continues. She walks to the platform steps onto it and sits. Yes, sits. Not like a goat, like a judge or an oracle. You approach slowly. The spiral in your pouch begins to warm again. Near the edge of the bone platform, you see coral. Not like the others. This coral grows in the air in delicate little fans and spirals. No water nearby, no host bone. Just air. You crouch and study it. One strand moves as you breathe, curling toward you slightly. You hold your hand nearby and it wraps gently around your finger. Not tightly. Like a handshake made by memory. A soft, familiar hum rises from the crowned goat's throat. You freeze, because now the coral in your pouch is vibrating, not just warm, vibrating in sync with her voice. You take it out, and it glows, pulses, and then cracks. Not broken, opened. Inside a tiny sprig of living coral, pink, glowing, breathing. You stare at it, then back at the goat. Her eyes are locked on yours. A wind stirs not from the sea. From within the coral towers themselves. It pushes sand in careful little swirls, almost script-like. And with each gust, the towers hum, not together, but in harmony. Like each one knows a different verse of the same song. You step onto the bone platform. It's warm. Not like sun-warmed stone. Like something sleeping just beneath the surface. You kneel before the goat. She lowers her head, and the coral antlers bloom. Not metaphor, not poetry. They literally bloom tiny flowers of orange and red open along her horn spiral, releasing a scent that smells like rain on dry bark and something older than hope. She hums again, and something inside your chest shifts. Not physically, not yet, but the spiral inside of your memory begins to turn. The goat places one hoof on your knee. You don't flinch, because this isn't about fear anymore. It's exchange. You close your eyes, and for a moment you are inside her memory. Not a dream. A recording, full sensory. You stand in her body on a cliff edge in a time when there were no tents, no boats, no names. You feel the wind full of voices and the coral speaking in pulses. You understand then, without language, that goats didn't wear coral to look beautiful or sacred. They wore it to translate, to hold the signal of a world humans were too loud to hear. When you open your eyes, the lagoon is empty. The goat is gone. The towers are silent. But your hand holds the living coral still. Historians still debate whether coral has ever grown in air. Some say it's a misidentification of fossilized lichen or wind-sculpted salt. But a few geologists whisper of remote caves where breathing coral is said to cling to bone altars, always arranged in spirals. No one's brought one back. They say it dies the moment it's removed from the wind. One odd fact in Polynesian myth. There's a legend of coral that feeds on silence. It was said to bloom only in the presence of creatures that had forgotten how to scream. You think of that as you return to camp. The crowned goat never comes back. But when you press the coral sprig gently to the tide pool water, it doesn't sink, doesn't float. It drifts, as if it's been waiting to return home. The next morning, no one speaks. Not because something bad has happened, but because something is happening and no one wants to scare it off. The tide pool where you place the coral sprig has changed. It shimmers not in color but in movement like it's breathing in reverse. Even the herders, usually casual around the water, now walk past with their eyes averted, feet soft on the stones. You ask the eldest herder what's going on. She sucks her teeth and squints at the water. She accepted your gift, she mutters. Who did? The old woman points at the pool but says nothing more. The herders gather again that night. No fire, just moonlight and the sound of hoofbeats. It's not a ritual, not even a meeting. They're waiting for something, and it arrives. You hear it first, a hum. Not from a goat, not from the coral towers, from the sea itself. A sound so deep it seems to vibrate your lungs before your ears even register it. Then from over the cliffs, a single goat appears, male, massive, with spiral horns that gleam like blackened driftwood. Wrapped around one is a braid of crimson coral. The herders recoil. Some make signs with their fingers, others bow their heads. You know the color by now. Red is for death. But the goat isn't dying. He's thriving. Every step he takes is deliberate regal. The braid of red coral moves with him like a living vein. He stops at the edge of the pool and gazes into the water. The pool begins to sing. Not a metaphor, a song rises from the water itself, polyphonic, old, a harmony of tides and wind and distant cracking bone. The red-crowned goat hums back. And then, in a voice that isn't a voice at all, but a vibration in your teeth and behind your eyes, you hear a story. Not in words, in sequence. A famine long ago, worse than any remembered. Fish vanished, plants refused to bloom. The goats grew thin, the humans desperate, until one goat walked into the ocean. No one stopped him. He walked until only his horns remained above water, spiraled red humming. And then, fish returned. Rain came. The wind softened. They say he traded something, not his life, something older. Memory. You realize what you're hearing. It's the story of the goat that changed the tide. And it's not myth. It's happening again. The red-braided goat lowers his head and the tide pool glows. Not just one color, every coral hue pulses in sequence like the reef is remembering its own bloodline. The hum shifts pitch, and suddenly you feel it. The pull. Your spiral shard, long dormant, begins to ache in your pouch. Not a burn, not heat, just longing. You pull it out. It is glowing again, yes, but also vibrating in perfect synchrony with the pool. The red-braided goat turns his head slowly toward you. No sound? But the meaning is clear. Join the hum. You kneel at the pool and press the shard into the water. There's a moment of silence. Then a surge not of water, but of memory. Images slam into you. Goats gathering in spirals to call storms. Children braiding coral by moonlight. A lone goat standing on a cliff, horns crackling with lightning. Something beneath the waves. Listening. You gasp and fall backward, breath gone. The goat nods once, and hums. Then he turns and walks back toward the cliffs. The water stills. The singing fades. But your shard, now cracked clean through. Historians still debate whether this tale of the tide goat was an agricultural metaphor or an actual early weather rite. Some believe goats were trained to walk into water as a form of sacrifice, though no remains have ever been found offshore. Others think the red coral was dyed sea sponge used symbolically in rituals of seasonal change. But none of that explains what you saw, or how the pool now echoes back your name when you whisper to it. One odd fact, some deep-sea corals can live for over 4,000 years. Long enough to remember not just tide and time, but perhaps sound. You sit by the pool for hours after the goat vanishes. The spiral shard in your hand splits quietly into two, revealing a new sprig within this one pale gold. You don't know what it means yet, but you will, because something was traded again tonight. And now the tide knows your voice. You wake with seawater in your mouth and a humming in your bones. Not figuratively. You can feel it low resonant, steady as a heartbeat. When you press your palms to the ground, the hum grows louder. It's not the earth, not the wind. It's coming from your spiral shard, or more precisely from what the shard became. The golden sprig inside it now twists of its own accord. Tiny pulsing filaments extend from its tip and curl gently in the direction of the tide pool like it's reaching for home or sending signal. You hold it to your ear not because you expect to hear anything, but because instinct tells you to. And yes, there it is, a song. Low and underformed, like something rehearsing a melody it forgot mid-sentence. But it's there, echoed faintly in Coral's quiet voice. The crowned goat is gone. So is the red-braided one. But something new waits for you near the pool, a stone sculpture half buried in the sand overnight. It wasn't there before. It's goat-shaped but wrong. Its horns are too many. 7 spirals each wrapped in one another like knots from an impossible alphabet. Its eyes are shallow holes filled with dried salt. The coral grows from the chest, not the head. You stare at it for too long, then look away and realize you're not alone. One of the younger herders stands nearby holding what looks like a broken instrument, something between a ram's horn and a conch shell. They lift it to their lips and blow. The sound is not a note. It's a rumble, felt more than heard, and every goat in the valley freezes. Then the water moves. Not waves, not wind. The pool vibrates. The coral vibrates. Your teeth vibrate until the hum becomes a shape. You don't see it, you feel it. A spiral inside a spiral. A pattern known only to wind and time. You understand now. Some horns, when wrapped in coral, become instruments. That's what they were for. The braids, the reefs, the spirals, not decoration. Communication. You step forward and the young herder hands you the instrument. It's yours now, they whisper. She left it for you. You don't ask who she is, you already know. You raise it to your mouth and blow gently. The sound is softer than theirs, uncertain quivering. But it reaches. The goats lift their heads. Several take cautious steps towards you. A few hum back. One kneels. You nearly drop the horn. You try again, this time louder, steadier. And suddenly clarity. The hum returns clear and echoing. And something hums back, but not from the goats. From beneath the water. A note too deep to exist, too wide to be real. And yet there it is. Rolling up from below the pool from coral layers no one's ever touched. Something else is listening. Historians still debate whether horn instruments were ever used among coastal pastoral cultures. The few that have survived are often confused with ceremonial items or war trumpets. But one carved fossil horn found in a seaside cave in Crete contains residue not of blood but of kelp and limestone, suggesting ocean use. Some call these subsonic lures. Others call them underwater bells. You hold the horn tighter. Try one last time. This time the coral around the pool pulses in rhythm. And so do the goats. You're no longer an observer. You're part of the call. The herders stay back silent. Reverent. You know this rhythm now. The shape of the sound. You hum, the goats follow. They hum back and the coral lights up. Even the sky seems to hold its breath. And then ripples. Not just in water, in air. You feel them brushing your skin, lifting the hair on your arms, sweeping tiny vibrations through your chest. Something is rising. You drop the horn. The young herder catches it, nods. You called it. You step back as the water splits, not dramatically, not like the sea parting, but gently, like a whisper lifting its skirt. And from beneath, a shape surfaces. Not alive, not now. It's a horn, goat-shaped, but fossilized, and wrapped entirely in coral. The color is silver. You reach down and lift it. It's heavier than it should be. Cold. Quiet. But when you touch, the bass hum, soft and sad, like something that waited too long to be heard. You press it to your chest. It stops. But your spiral shard in your other hand glows again. And this time you hear your name not in voice, in tone. Historians still debate whether sonar mimicry was ever developed by land animals. It sounds absurd. And yet, some recent studies on bone-conducted sound in ungulates hint at higher resonance sensitivity than once believed. One final fact. Underwater bells crafted from horn coral or shell have been found across the ancient Mediterranean, their purpose long forgotten. But every one of them, in perfect spiral, just like the horns, and just like you. Night falls without color, no stars, just shadow and the metallic breath of the sea pressing gently at your shoulders like it's reminding you you're temporary. The goats lie still tonight, none hum, none braid. Even the child doesn't appear. But the herders. They gather around the fire unusually solemn. Someone places a stone disc at the center of the circle. It's carved on both sides. Spiral, hoofprints, and something else. Shells, not just as decoration, but arranged in a pattern you've seen before. You blink. It's the same configuration the coral hummed into the tide pool the night the red-braided goat returned. You trace the edges with your thumb, and it vibrates, faintly, as if responding. The eldest herder speaks. Before the tribes of land and sea divided, they shared currency. You glance up. Currency, she nods. Shell for water, hoof for land, coral for memory. It makes no sense, but it feels like it should. The tale unfolds slowly. Back before written language. Back before names. When tribes lived in shifting harmony, one group tending land, one tending sea, and in between, the goat keepers, a neutral order, small in number. Their herds roamed both territories, eating salt lichen on the cliffs kelp at low tide, barley in the wind fields. These goats wore coral not as decoration but as treaty. The more coral a goat bore, the more weight it carried. Not physical, but diplomatic. Goats were sent as messengers walking between wind clans and shell divers. A particularly decorated nanny could silence war drums with a single bleat. A coral horn dropped at a village gate meant peace had been negotiated, or broken. The goat was contract, and the coral, proof of memory. You stare down at your own spiral shard again. Its glow has faded, but the crack that once ran through it is now sealed. Not gone. Healed. The herder continues. They say once a coral-bearing goat went missing during a treaty run. Took the high cliffs instead of the tide path. Never arrived. Both tribes took it as betrayal, and war began. Over goats. Over memory. And when the rain stopped, they said the coral refused to grow. You feel something twist in your gut. It's because that same pattern weather memory coral has followed you since the first day you saw the goat on the cliff. And now it clicks. This wasn't superstition. It was a system. Coral horn, hum spiral, all a language forgotten because it was never written. Only passed bone to bone, wind to wind. The youngest herder, barely 10, pulls out a hide scroll and unrolls it. There drawn in faint ochre, a goat with braids that spiral in a double helix. In its horns, tiny carved shell emblems. You lean forward. What's that? The child shrugs. The last treaty. Nobody knows what it said. Because no one can read it. Not anymore. Too much silence, the elder says. The coral forgets when no one hums. Historians still debate whether treaties between ancient land and sea peoples were literal or symbolic. Some argue that goats were a shared food source, nothing more. But others cite matching iconography in coastal caves. Goats bearing coral crowns carved beside waves and wind lines. One such carving in northern Algeria shows a goat with one horn curled landward, one horn seaward. Its eyes are closed, its mouth is open, and underneath, a spiral made of shells. You think about your spiral, your fossil horn, your living coral shard, and something occurs to you. You've seen this language before. Not on paper, not in symbols, in sound. That night you return to the tide pool with the horn that surfaced days ago. You play the same note, the one that cracked the spiral open. And this time, the pool answers in kind. A mirrored note, harmonized, warmer, older. The hum is back, but now, it's in layers. As if more than one voice is speaking. Not goats, not coral, memory itself. You blow again. The herders don't stop you. The goats rise one by one, and a soft chant begins. Not words, shell sounds, hoof clicks, wind vowels. The first treaty isn't lost. It's singing. And you're the one holding the instrument. You keep playing, Not as a performance, not as a plea, just a repetition sound, shaping memory, memory shaping sound. The horn in your hands shifts slightly with each breath. Warmer, lighter, almost pliable like coral softening in a child's bath. The tide pool hums back 3 notes this time. The herders stay silent, their eyes reflecting the phosphorescent gleam beginning to spread through the water like slow lightning. And then, a crack. Not from the horn, from the pool. A thin fracture splits across one coral mass at the basin's center, releasing a filament of dark red mist into the current. The goats step back. The herders do not. Instead, they begin drawing spirals in the sand, feet, fingers, even horns, and humming a note that sounds older than language. You follow their rhythm, blowing gently into the horn once more. The crack widens. From within the coral emerges something small, brittle, clattering like shell and bone. A broken crown. It rolls toward your feet. You pick it up. The coral is black-veined with streaks of once red threads now faded to rust. You recognize it from an earlier dream, the coral braid the old goat wore before lightning claimed him. You stare at it. It doesn't glow, doesn't hum. Then it fractures, shatters into 8 pieces. And your goat, the pale one returned again without sound, steps forward. One by one she eats the pieces. No hesitation, no rush. The herders close their eyes. You open yours wider. When she finishes, her horns pulse faintly with color. The coral crown regrows, but differently this time. Less ornamental, more functional. Thin tendrils extend like antennae twitching with the wind. She hums, and the coral in your palm responds with heat. Suddenly she buckles. Her legs fold. The herders move to catch her. You leap forward too. Too late. She collapses. Still, silent. The glow fades. Someone whispers behind you. It was too much. Another? The crown cracked her spine. You kneel beside her. Run your fingers through the coral, still curling at the base of her horn. It's beautiful, intricate, and fragile. It snaps as you touch it. A hairline fracture spreads across the base. You sit back shaking. The child? Yes, the child again, always there when no one sees them coming, appears beside you. They don't look at the goat. They look at you. Now you have to choose. Choose what? They point at the horn still in your lap, whether it stays an instrument, then gesture at the broken coral crown, or becomes a wound. You understand what they mean. The goat didn't die from the coral. She broke because the coral had no voice. No one translated the memory fast enough. No one shared the sound. And coral that remembers too much too long can silence. It breaks. Historians still debate whether the ancient practice of embedding coral into horn was ceremonial or diagnostic. Some think coral acted as a kind of environmental sensor, growing differently in response to air pressure, rainfall, or wind vibration. But others see it as too alive, too reactive, parasitic even. One theory claims coral embedded in horn forms micro-fissures over time so subtle you won't see them until the horn fails. The fracture always begins at the spiral's origin. And when that breaks, the signal ends. You sit beside her all night. The herders do not bury her. They set her adrift on a raft woven from driftwood and saltgrass. They place the horn on her chest. Not the one you played, the one she bore. The red-braided memory that cracked apart and still asked to be worn again. At sunrise, they light the raft. You expect fire, but it's the wind that carries her. A gust so fierce it lifts the raft, slightly spins it, and drags it silently across the water. You hum a single note. The raft responds by catching flame. Only the coral doesn't burn. It glows, then dims, then crumbles, to ash, to sand, to memory. After the burning, the silence is painful, not just quiet, absent, as if the air has swallowed its own echo and is waiting for someone to hum it back. You try. You lift the horn, press it to your lips, and breathe. Nothing. The note is gone. The spiral, once warm and vibrating, now feels like dry driftwood. The golden coral sprig you carried brittle. It cracks between your fingers with a sound so sharp it startles even the goats. You are not grieving alone. The herders say nothing, but one by one they return to the tide pool with old shards broken. Braids, fossil scraps, each item laid reverently at the edge, like offerings to an altar that no longer answers. Then someone mentions the caverns. You've heard whispers before, distant caves in the cliffs to the west, filled with bones and spirals, and walls painted with ochre and blood. Echo chambers, some say. Others claim they're burial sites for goat keepers who could no longer hold the hum. You leave at dawn, alone. The trek is brutal. Slopes of loose stone, cracks in the earth that breathe hot air as if the world below is still dreaming. You follow faint hoofprints too old to be recent, too specific to be random. And eventually, you arrive. A cave mouth choked with seaweed. The tide reaches for it twice a day but never claims it. The entrance smells like memory and mold. Inside, the darkness eats you whole. The first chamber is wide, hollow, and dry. You see nothing until your eyes adjust. Then spirals, everywhere, etched into the walls, painted on ceilings, scratched into bones, arranged in rows like sleeping herds. Goats, yes, but also human. Their skulls are placed side by side, each one adorned with bits of coral braided into ancient sinew. Some of the coral still glows faintly like a dying ember whispering, "I'm not finished yet." At the center of the cave is a stone table, flat, perfectly cut, clearly out of place in this otherwise natural grotto. On it, a single crown, not goat-sized, human-sized. You step forward hard, thudding against your ribs like a warning drum. The crown is beautiful coral, branching outward in twin spirals, soft blue at the edges, bone white at the base. It looks delicate, but it radiates pressure. Your ears pop. The horn in your hand begins to hum again. Not a tone. A phrase. Do not. You reach anyway. The moment your fingers touch the coral, the cave answers. Echo. 1,000 hums at once. Layered, staggered, broken into tones you didn't know you could hear. The crown lifts itself slightly. You pull back. But the horn, it sings. Not you. It sings the story of a goat born with coral in its lungs, of a cave carved by sound, of a woman who wore a crown and forgot her name because she remembered too many others. You fall to your knees, overwhelmed. The wall before you shifts. Words, images, goats drawn upside down as if walking the cave's ceiling. One figure appears over and over, a tall, crowned human. Her arms raised a spiral, hovering above her chest like a second heart. And behind her always the pale goat, the same one. Not a lineage, the same goat. You stumble backward. The crown on the table tilts slightly toward you, inviting or warning. Outside you hear the tide return. The wind sighs through the entrance like a voice long denied. You ask the cave aloud, "What was she?" The horn hums back, "Translator." Historians still debate whether the Cave of Spirals ever existed. Some suggest it was a metaphor for inner memory, a chamber of resonance found only in trance. Others insist cave paintings across coastal Asia depict upside-down goats for a reason, creatures that once bridged the above and the beneath. One odd note in a recently unearthed Phoenician tablet. The phrase "bone of tide, breath of cliff" appears beside a sketch of a goat, with 4 horns, 2 natural, 2 coral, and beneath it the word enti, the name of the translator. You don't take the crown, but you don't leave it either. You hum once, and the cave hums back. A perfect spiral. You return from the cavern not quite the same. The wind knows your shape now. It folds differently around you, slipping through your clothes like it's testing for cracks. The herders see it too. They don't speak, but they move aside when you walk through camp like you're carrying something too big for speech. Maybe you are. You haven't told them about the crown. You haven't had to. The goats already know. They follow you more closely now, especially the hornless ones. They walk in pairs, mirroring each other's steps in perfect rhythm. One even sleeps beside your tent nose, pressed to your broken coral shard, which no longer glows but feels warm when it dreams. You feel it breathe sometimes. Not literally, but close. That night, the child returns with something wrapped in dried kelp. They hand it to you without speaking. Inside is a scroll-old, thin, smoothed goat skin. Spirals drawn in 3 colors, blue, red, and gold. They don't match any of the older carvings. These are instructional. Arrows, repetition, symbols for pause. Music notation, not for voices, for horns. You rush to your tent, pull out the old coral horn, the one dredged from the pool, cracked then healed, and line it up against the drawing. Every spiral fits. It's a score. You run your finger across the ink and feel a gentle hum beneath the page. Not from the scroll, from the ground. You blow the first note. The goats freeze. The herders look up, and the wind shifts fast and sharp, pulling sand into spiral formations across the valley floor. You blow again. This time the tide responds. You can't see it, but you hear it waves dragging slower, like being held back by memory. Held in place. A third note. A fourth. And from the far cliff wall, a response soft and trembling. Not from a goat. From inside the cliff, the rocks hum back. A low trembling vibration that matches your melody exactly, but stretched and cracked like an old voice trying to sing something it learned when the earth was younger. The cliff begins to open, not collapse open. A seam appears, splitting the rock in a perfect vertical spiral, revealing a dark hollow inside. And in it bones. Dozens. All goat. Each crowned with coral laid head to tail in perfect spirals. The tomb of the messengers. The herders fall to their knees. The child hums one note and vanishes again. You step forward, but something stops you. A vibration, higher, closer. From beneath your foot, you step back. The sand gives way, and there it is. A skull. Human, not fossilized. Recent. Crowned in coral, but not like the others. Not decorative. Functional. Each spiral etched with tiny markings, glyphs you recognize from the score. It's Enti, or someone like her. Another translator, or the last one before you. You kneel. Place your hand gently on the skull, and it hums, softly, 3 notes. Your spiral shard glows again, faint but sure. The horn in your hand begins to heat, and inside the cliff, a new shape appears stepping forward on hooves so old they leave no prints in the sand. It's the pale goat, returned, crowned, not with coral, with light. Historians still debate whether such tombs were real. Some believe they're simply metaphors for forgotten generations, those who preserved oral tradition before writing stole its breath. But across coastal Africa, there are caves with spiral arrangements of bones, each aligned precisely to equinox light. None ever explained. All accompanied by coral fragments too deep inland to be native. One detail stands out. A recurring carving across multiple caves. A goat facing a human, both crowned, both humming. And above them a single spiral unfinished. Waiting. That night, the pale goat walks beside you to the tide pool. The cliff's seam still glows faintly behind you. The scroll rests in your lap, your horn across your knees. You blow the last note in the sequence. The pool sings back, not in echo but in harmony. And the bones inside the cliff, they glow, then dim, then rest. Memory finally laid down. You don't sleep, not because you're afraid, but because rest feels irrelevant now, like blinking during the final moment of a story. The pale goat doesn't sleep either. She stands at the edge of the tide pool all night, watching the wind press lines across the water's skin. The coral crown above her horns has stopped growing. It doesn't need to anymore. It's finished listening. Now it remembers. At sunrise, the herders gather silently. They wear no paint, no shells, just themselves. And they carry no instruments, only small bundles of coral and hair. Some hold broken spirals, others hold nothing. The child arrives last. They walk straight to you and press something into your palm. It's the original braid, the soft pink coral thread you first saw them tie, now stiffened and crusted from age and salt. You expect it to crumble. Instead, it holds firm, waiting. One of the herders steps forward and kneels beside the tide pool. With great care, he drops a sliver of blue coral into the center. It sinks, but slowly. Like it's considering the descent. Then without warning, the water flashes not with color, but with memory. You feel it, all of it. The goat that changed the tide. The cave carved by Echo, the translator who wore spirals in place of a name. The war that broke when a message failed. The coral that never stopped growing. The child who never aged. Your knees give out. The horn slides from your lap and rolls into the pool. The spiral shard in your pocket vibrates until it crumbles into dust as if relieved to finally let go. The tide pool shifts and opens, a hole. A spiral-shaped chute into blackness. You peer in. There's no water now. Just wind and light and a low, constant hum that's been there forever and never once raised its voice. The pale goat approaches. She places one hoof at the rim, then turns to you. There's no question. You know, only one of you goes. You bow. She steps in. The spiral swallows her without splash or sound. Gone. The hole closes. The pool is just water again. You don't cry, because this is not loss. It's translation. The herders begin to hum. Not a morning chant. A memory echo. You hum with them. And suddenly, the spirals carved in the cliff painted on tents braided into goat hair, they don't look like symbols anymore. They look like language. Alive. The horn still humming faintly in the pool floats back to the surface. You retrieve it. Hold it gently. It's heavier now, full of something you can't name. A wind moves through the camp. And in that moment, you understand what the coral crowns were never able to say. It wasn't about warning, or weather, or even communication. It was about reminding the world that memory must have a carrier. And now that carrier is you. Historians still debate whether the legend of the coral-wearing goats began with metaphor mutation or miracle. Some call it the invention of diplomacy through animal proxy. Others see only superstition. But deep beneath the cliffs, coral still grows in perfect silence. And sometimes only when no one is watching it hums. The goats hear it, and so do you. So now you sit by the tide pool alone, fingers trailing in the shallow's horn, resting across your knees like a folded wing. The wind is soft again, the coral doesn't glow. The goats graze like any other morning. But you know better. You know everything has changed. The pale goat is gone, but not lost. The memory you carry is full, not heavy. It hums sometimes when you're quiet, when the breeze turns warm, and the spiral shadows dance across your skin. You speak less now, but you listen more. The herders call you the one with two voices, your own and the echoes. You hum when storms gather. Sometimes the rain listens. The horn still sings, but only when the tide asks. You never force it. You never play to be heard. You play to remember. And when children ask about the coral, why it grows on bone, why it glows, why goats once wore it like crowns, you smile. Not because you have the answer, but because you are the answer. You remind them it's not about goats. It's not even about coral. It's about carrying memory without breaking. So they braid pink strands into the smallest horns, just in case. And when the pool hums again, they'll know what to do.